your seatbelt, okay? I'm Officer Lipper with the Denver Police Department, okay?
I'm sorry, Mom. God.
It was just after 10 p.m. on a February night in 2021 when Pamela Cabriales pulled up to a red light on Interstate 25 in Denver. She wasn't speeding, wasn't honking, just waiting, like anyone else might on their way home. But in the next few seconds, her life would be stolen by someone she didn't know, someone who didn't know her either, and someone who, shockingly, was just 14 years old. That boy was Remy Cordova.
You said you heard multiple pops. You went pop, pop, pop,
Yeah.
pop. How many of those do you think you heard the first time?
I'm
in your
gonna
estimation?
call it 5 to 7, perhaps.
Okay, and then you said you ducked down and heard several more pops. How many more do you think you heard?
Perhaps 3.
Okay.
And the break in between the two was a second or two
Okay.
that it paused.
Sure.
It wasn't very long.
Witnesses said the incident started with something incredibly minor, a small fender bender involving Pamela's car and a black Honda. She got out to inspect the damage and maybe exchange information. But what she didn't know was that Remy and his 18-year-old friend, Nicholas Mendez, weren't about to talk. They were about to kill.
When he got out, he had his hoodie on, and he turned to face towards north, and all I see is the side of his forehead, so literally right here.
Okay.
And then that's when I noticed that he lifted up his arm, and his arm was being covered by the top of the car. And I'm in a Ford Edge, so I say it's a pretty big car. He was about like 5'6", 5'7", and that's when I noticed that he had a gun. So my first instinct when I heard it was to get down, just in case if they started shooting towards me.
Okay.
I seen the light from when you shoot the gun, and you have the light and the sound.
Okay.
So that's what I heard. I heard the toot, toot, toot.
Police say the two teens circled back, parked behind her, and opened fire with an AR-15. Multiple shots ripped through her vehicle. Pamela was struck in the head, and within moments, she was gone. By the time emergency crews arrived, she was barely clinging to life.
Ma'am, I'm gonna cut your seatbelt, okay? I'm Officer Lipper with the Denver Police Department, okay?
Pamela was rushed to the hospital, but the injuries were too severe. She died the next day, leaving behind a 6-year-old son and a devastated family still asking why. This wasn't a gang hit. It wasn't a robbery gone wrong. It wasn't even premeditated in any traditional sense. This was a random act of senseless violence committed by a teenager with a military-grade weapon, over something as trivial as a minor car bump. When police began reviewing surveillance footage and collecting witness accounts, a horrifying pattern emerged. The black Honda had been circling the area before the shooting, and one of the suspects, Remy Cordova, was already known to authorities. At just 14, he had already been associated with prior violent behavior. But no one expected this. No one expected him to take a rifle and end the life of a woman he'd never met.
Tell me more about the conversation in the car. Who notices the police either on the side of you or behind you?
I mean, we all did, to be honest, because when you're looking at when you at the stop sign, you're gonna look at your window.
Okay.
And then when I looked out the window, I seen the police pull up.
What is the conversation in the car?
Really wasn't no conversation in the car, but they could go.
I'm sorry?
I said it wasn't no conversation in no car, but go.
But go?
Yes.
Why was that?
I don't know.
Okay.
What makes this case even more haunting is what happened next. The two teens didn't flee in panic. They didn't hide the weapon. Instead, they reportedly bragged about the shooting. Remy in particular seemed almost emotionless in the aftermath, as if what he'd done didn't even register as real. By the time police caught up with them, both suspects had returned to their lives like nothing had happened. But nothing would ever be the same. Not for Pamela's family, and not for the justice system suddenly forced to answer a devastating question. What do you do when a child commits a murder so cold-blooded it rivals anything an adult could do? When news broke that the shooter was only 14 years old, the public reaction was disbelief, then outrage. How could someone so young be capable of something so brutal? And how did he get his hands on an AR-15? Remy Cordova wasn't your typical 8th grader. Court records would later reveal that he had a troubled history, one marked by instability, missed interventions, and a growing fascination with gang culture and violence. He had been arrested before for weapons-related incidents. Teachers and neighbors recalled a boy who seemed angry, detached, but never imagined capable of murder. In interrogation footage later released to the public, Remy barely flinched when detectives told him Pamela Cabriales had died. He sat calmly, offered clipped answers, and at times even looked bored. There was no visible remorse, no tears, just a teenage boy who spoke like he was in trouble for skipping school, not taking a woman's life. His co-defendant, 18-year-old Nicholas Mendez, was the one who allegedly gave Remy the AR-15 and helped plan the ambush. Prosecutors said the two circled back intentionally to confront Pamela, and when they returned, Remy opened fire without hesitation. According to court transcripts, it was Remy who fired all 6 rounds. It was Remy who stood outside the vehicle, and it was Remy who made sure Pamela couldn't survive. For many, the most chilling part wasn't just the act, it was the indifference. Detectives later described Remy as one of the coldest young offenders they'd ever dealt with. No breakdown, no apology, just flat answers like, "I shot her." He even corrected investigators when they miscounted the number of shots, saying, "It was 6, not 5. At just 14, Remy wasn't even old enough to drive, vote, or legally own a firearm, but he was now being charged as an adult for first-degree murder. The Denver District Attorney's Office didn't hesitate. They pursued the harshest penalty possible, life in prison. This decision ignited a debate across Colorado. Should someone so young spend life behind bars without parole? Is rehabilitation even possible in a case like this? And who failed Remy before that AR-15 ever landed in his hands? The Cabriales family had no doubts. For them, it wasn't about the killer's age. It was about the life taken. Pamela had been a devoted mother, sister, and friend. She had plans. She had people who loved her. And she had no idea her night would end in violence because of a teenager's decision to turn a mistake into a massacre. In the court of public opinion, Remy Cordova wasn't just a teen offender. He was a symbol of a deeper systemic failure, where warnings were ignored, consequences delayed, and a young life warped into something irredeemable. But there was more to uncover, including how the justice system responded, the court's final ruling, and what Pamela's family did to make sure her name would never be forgotten. The trial of Remy Cordova became one of the most closely watched juvenile murder cases in Colorado's recent history. And for good reason. A 14-year-old firing an AR-15 into a stranger's car over a minor accident wasn't just disturbing, it was unprecedented. Prosecutors made their stance clear from day one. This was a calculated act, not a juvenile mistake. In opening statements, they described how Remy and Nicholas Mendez allegedly stalked Pamela Cabriales' car after she backed into their vehicle at a red light. Instead of reporting the incident or letting it go, the two teens reportedly spent the next 15 minutes planning revenge. According to surveillance footage and phone records presented in court, they drove around, coordinated via messages, and returned to the intersection. That's when Remy exited the vehicle, AR-15 in hand, and opened fire on Pamela as she sat in her car. 6 rounds, no hesitation. The final bullet struck her in the head. In courtroom testimony, Denver detectives stated that Remy showed no emotional response throughout his interviews. One investigator said, "I've dealt with hardened adult criminals who showed more remorse." That statement would echo in headlines across the country. Meanwhile, Pamela's family sat just feet away, forced to relive the moment their loved one's life was stolen. Her brother, Alex Cabriales, told the court, "She was sitting in her car. That's it. She didn't threaten anyone. She didn't escalate. And now she's gone because a 14-year-old decided she didn't deserve to live." Remy's defense team pushed back, arguing that his brain was still developing, that he had been influenced by older peers, and that charging him as an adult would deny him the chance for rehabilitation. They cited studies about juvenile neuroscience and presented records showing a long history of instability in Remy's life. absentee parenting, school expulsions, run-ins with child services. But the jury wasn't swayed. In July 2022, Remy Cordova was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 40 years, the harshest penalty allowed under Colorado law for a juvenile. It was a sentence that sparked new debate across the state. Some argued that 40 years before parole eligibility was too lenient. Others said no 14-year-old should be handed a life sentence, regardless of the crime. But for Pamela's family, justice had finally arrived. Outside the courthouse, her brother addressed the media. "There's no winning here. We don't get Pamela back. But maybe this reminds people that this kind of violence, this kind of access to weapons, it's not just a statistic. It's real. It's permanent. And we're the ones left behind." But even with a verdict rendered and a sentence handed down, questions lingered. How did a 14-year-old get access to a military-grade rifle? Who supplied it? And what role did his environment, or failures in the system, play in turning a child into a killer? Pamela Cabriales' death left a void, not just for her family, but for an entire community grappling with a harsh truth. This wasn't just a tragedy. It was a symptom of something deeper. In the weeks following Remy Cordova's conviction, Denver city leaders faced mounting pressure. How had a 14-year-old gained access to an AR-15? Who provided the weapon? And why weren't earlier warning signs caught? Police investigations later revealed that Remy had ties to known gang affiliates in the area. Young men who glorified street violence and treated weapons like currency. The AR-15 used in the murder? It had been stolen in a burglary months prior and circulated among teenagers before ending up in Remy's hands. No one knew, or perhaps no one cared, that a middle schooler had it. Even more disturbing were reports showing that Remy had already been arrested in a previous aggravated robbery case just weeks before the shooting. Despite his age and prior offenses, no mental health intervention, weapons education, or counseling had been enforced. Denver's District Attorney Beth McCann called it a catastrophic failure across the board. In a public statement, she said, "This case exposes the cracks in how we handle youth crime, access to weapons, and violent peer influence. We can't ignore it anymore." Meanwhile, Pamela's family became outspoken advocates for tighter juvenile gun control and accountability measures. They lobbied for new legislation that would penalize adults who provide firearms to minors, directly or through negligence. Their campaign, titled Pamela's Law, gained early traction in Colorado's state legislature. The case also ignited a national conversation about the balance between rehabilitation and justice for juvenile offenders. Advocates argued that teens like Remy, shaped by trauma and poor environments, deserved a chance at redemption. Others insisted that some crimes, especially ones as calculated and fatal as this, demand full consequences. But beyond policy and opinion, Pamela's story took root in the hearts of everyday people. Memorials were held at the site of the shooting. A mural was painted downtown with her smile beaming over the city skyline. And her 6-year-old son, who had to grow up without a mother, became a symbol of the human cost behind every headline. At her memorial, a close friend read a message Pamela had written years before in a birthday card. "Life doesn't always go as planned, but kindness always comes back around. Love loud, laugh harder, and never waste time being afraid." It was a chilling echo of a life cut short, and a reminder that behind every true crime story is a family still waking up without the person they loved. Remy Cordova will spend decades in prison, but the impact of what he did, and the questions it raised, are still echoing in courtrooms, city councils, and homes across America. The justice system may have closed the file, but Pamela Cabriales' story still asks the question, how do we stop the next child from becoming a killer? This is Vaulted Crimes. Real stories, real consequences.